Encounter is brought to you by the Broome County Council of Churches, where we connect compassion with needs as we inspire growth with dignity. You'll find us in special places throughout the community. For those who remain hungry, we provide meals. For those who are challenged, we build wheelchair ramps. We comfort those who are ill, minister to those who are confined, and we remain an advocate for change and understanding on behalf of every element of our community. Connect and inspire. Encounter the Broome County Council of Churches.
I hope my nose cooperates.
Hello, I'm Reverend Alicia Dixon-Gerard. I'm one of the co-hosts of Encounter, a show of the Broome County Council of Churches, where we talk about faith and family and community and all sorts of current events and other fabulous topics. So I'm so happy today to have with me Dr. Ann Bailey, who's going to be talking with me about Juneteenth. So I want to welcome her and let her tell us more about herself. Tell us about you. First, thank you for being here. You are so super busy because you have like such a major position in the community. So thank you for making time for us.
Oh, it's a pleasure. And I'm just, I'm grateful to be asked, honored to be asked. Because of the kind of work that I do, which is scholarship, which is also informed by my community, both local, national, and international. It's always great to have an outlet to be able to share some of that work and hopefully get people interested in public history and a bunch of other things. So I am a historian, professor of African and African American history, African diaspora studies in general.
Yeah.
And I'm also director of the Harriet Tubman Center for Freedom and Equity at Binghamton University.
Yes. So what is diaspora for those who may not know?
The diaspora, African diaspora, and the word diaspora really, originally was associated with Jewish communities and their scattering around the world. And so that's basically what it means. Now it's other communities like the African communities and lots of other communities have adopted the term. So African diaspora refers to communities of African descent who at some point, originated from the continent, either a long time ago, like hundreds of years, or maybe just last year, because they're immigrants, new immigrants to the U.S.
And we know for those who don't know, the African diaspora is really around the world. It kind of started with the transatlantic slave trade, which went throughout Europe and the Caribbean and the Americas. And so people of African descent are kind of scattered around the world.
All over the world. All over the world. They sure are. And the African American community here is a very rich, beautiful community, which is in many ways really laid the foundation for a lot of these other communities in the last, especially in the last few decades, who have then made America their home. So, diaspora is past, but it's also present at the same time.
Which is very fascinating. It's dynamic.
Sure, it's dynamic. It's modern. It's not just people of African descent who have a legacy of slavery. It's also, new immigrants, who come and make America their home and contribute in really positive, productive ways.
And history, of course, is one of my favorite topics next to theology. So it's partly why I like Dr. Bailey so much. Fellow history lovers. And we've actually known each other quite some time. I was trying to think back, like maybe almost 20 years.
Is it really? Wow.
Yeah, maybe a little less through church community, academic community. I'm a BU alum.
That's right.
Yeah, and we've just stayed in touch. I'm so glad we've stayed in touch.
Same here. Same here.
Because you are such a wealth of information, particularly about topics like this. So one of these things that has become part of the African diaspora is the celebration of Juneteenth, particularly for African Americans.
Right.
That's what we're talking about today.
Sure.
What exactly is Juneteenth?
Well, Juneteenth is, first of all, it really is like the combination of June plus 19th. So it's like Juneteenth made short. And it refers to a date, June 19th, 1865, when people of African descent were in Texas specifically, were first told that they were now free.
Yes.
So, after almost 250 years of slavery in the U.S., 1863 is when we really associate, a lot of the freedom for people of African descent came in 1863 through the Emancipation Proclamation. And the Emancipation Proclamation that Lincoln and Frederick Douglass and so many other people fought for, that was supposed to have meant freedom for people in the southern states and any of the rebel states. That should have been automatic freedom in January of 1863.
Yes.
So the fact that the folks in Texas only heard about it like 2 years, almost 2 years and a half later, because it's like June 19th, 1865, was really significant. So those people of African descent, those enslaved people in Texas, only received their freedom, at that late date. So this is to say that it was such a big celebration, it was so important that other African American communities started to think of that date as their Independence Day and as their Freedom Day, even though, as I said, it happened, or it should have happened a lot earlier. Yeah.
And it's hard for me to imagine 2.5 years later, like what that must have felt like. Probably both joy and anger. Like, you mean, I should have been free 2.5 years, that this should have taken effect. The feeling of maybe feeling a little cheated at first, to have been denied that for so much longer. And probably people who were the ones controlling the reins of the legislative branch of government there at the state level, slave owners, that sort of thing, I would say knew, but did not want freedom to be a reality for the enslaved peoples. And so 2.5 years extra of being in that condition and being denied freedom. So probably feeling some kind of way.
I would. I mean, if you just think about it on a human level, it's like Langston Hughes has this beautiful poem, What Happens to a Dream Deferred, and it's a dream deferred. It's like they've been literally many, not all, but many people of African descent who were enslaved. Many were people of faith, many faiths, but particularly the Christian faith. There were also Muslims as well, and they also practiced other religions. But many of them were people of faith. And they had been praying and working towards, in their own way, their freedom for hundreds of years. And there had been quite a bit of resistance from African Americans throughout that period of time, not just the Nat Turner rebellions, that big rebellion in 1831, or other kinds of physical resistance. People were really advocating for their freedom for a very long time. So the fact that it came and then they didn't know is, you're right, that had to have been a real sore spot. But what's interesting is that, and you find this in many diasporic communities, many African diasporic communities, is that they turned something that was really difficult and a real place of pain into, real purpose, if you will, and decided, we're going to make this a holiday. We're going to make a big thing of this. And so Juneteenth then became, not just for folks in Texas, but through many communities in the South, it became a time to celebrate, to have picnics, to have, and to really celebrate freedom and independence, a time of prayer in churches. And I mean, there was just, and it was kind of underground, not underground because it wasn't like a secret, but, mainstream communities didn't know a lot about it or didn't pay much attention to it if they did. But there was always this advocacy also to make it a holiday and to make it something that every American celebrated. And that's what finally happened in 2021, and we're thankful for that.
So I love that, taking things that can be painful and a sore spot and transitioning it in a way into moments of joy.
That's right.
And that really is what Juneteenth has become, this big celebratory, joyous partying occasion when people are just like, thank God we're free. And just, we're so glad that the prayers of the slaves were eventually answered, and that God answered, and that African folk today, people of African descent, are free.
Absolutely. Now, at the same time, which is something that I always hope that, I know that's partly how we think about it at the Tubman Center, is that, at the same time, we really wanted folks to understand that like freedom is a process also. It's not just like a day and you're free that day, whether the day was in 1863 or was in 1865. It's like it's still something that you have to work out the details of it and work ensure that you are advocating for your rights, all of it, of course, nonviolent, civil, democratic way, but you still have to be seeking to have the full rights of citizenship.
Yes.
And that was true then, it's true now.
It is. We needed the 13th, 14th, and 15th Amendment for citizenship for former enslaved folks to get the right to vote, to be recognized as citizens, even though we had been here for generations, but had been denied citizenship and the rights of basic citizens. So it took several amendments and then decades still of fighting voter suppression and not having the ability to be in Congress and the Senate and all these things. Like you said, it's been a process since then and continues to be now.
And it might be hard sometimes for some people in the audience to think, well, wait a minute, but if you got your freedom then and slavery's over, then it's all good. Everything should now be resolved. And I think in a perfect world, and certainly in the world that Martin Luther King envisioned, the beloved community, and I think the God of the Bible intends us to have that kind of world in which every person made in his image has a sense of, lives out a certain dignity in their life and can have, no one has more rights than anybody else, and everybody has an opportunity to be productive, to have families, to be able to pass on good things to their families, so that their families have an inheritance and a heritage. So I think that's what everybody wants, and I think we could all agree that that's a good thing, but the forces that kept people enslaved in the past, those forces are still, forces that, they're still a part of our society, and I think there's still a lot of folks who are they're not yet fully on board about the need for all of us to be at the same place, at the same starting table, the same starting block. Not some of us ahead of others, but yet we say it's an equal playing field, because it can't be an equal playing field if you had a 250-year head start.
Exactly, 250-year head start. That's a very good way of putting it. So that still today, people of color, Black, Latino, Indigenous folk, even Asian and Asian American folk are still finding that we're underrepresented in key places that affect our everyday life and our everyday ways in which we are citizens and have that dignity that you talked about. And access to the things that help life to be dignified. So that's a whole other discussion, of course.
It is.
But I like the fact that you are bringing up the important point that this celebration of freedom, Juneteenth, is not just then, but it's also now, that it's a process.
It's a process,
It's a process, so that we don't forget that easily, sometimes rights can be lost.
Very easily. I mean, right now, voting rights are a bit on the chopping block, and no one would expect that, like after what we went through, both in Reconstruction period, and then now, and then in the Civil Rights period in the 1960s. I mean, that's what so many people fought for. I mean, we all know the, Selma, the big film, the wonderful film by Ava DuVernay on Selma. And if you haven't seen it, you should watch it, because it gives you a quick recap of what Martin Luther King and others fought for in terms of voting rights. And those are things now that are, it's up for debate again. Because there was a time capsule put on it. It was like, oh, in 50 years it could be up for debate. So, there's a lot still yet to be done. And I guess one thing I always like to remind people is that historically, a win for a marginalized group like people of African descent has usually meant a win for everybody, historically. That's just like a fact. That's what happened when affirmative action came into play in the 1960s. It was meant to address this, this historical inequity, the fact that there was a 250-year head start for mainstream communities, and, Black communities were still playing catch up. And even though that was the intent of affirmative action, actually white women have benefited the most
Right.
from, that's like statistically true, because affirmative action also, it
Addresses
applied to
issues
them,
of
of gender, as it
inequity,
should,
right.
and appropriately so. But the point is that a win for African Americans has often also meant a win for the general community. And so I hope people will think about that. Anyone who's not sure why the struggle continues or why they should join us in this advocacy effort, I hope they think about that this is going to benefit everybody.
It's going to benefit everybody. I think of, biblically, of the least of these. That when you include the least of these, it just naturally expands the circle.
Absolutely.
So that everybody becomes included.
Absolutely.
Rather than drawing the circle small, the circle gets drawn wider.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. And I think it's also part of kind of the character of the people of African descent, that consideration for neighbor seems to be a cultural characteristic, that it's okay if you're included and I'm included. It doesn't have to be an either or. It seems to be a different worldview.
Right. There was definitely some of that. I think some of my work earlier on, but still now, like I've done a lot of work on the continent of Africa, and like everything else, just like how here we have a strong ideal about freedom, but we don't always meet that ideal, but it is a very strong American ethic. The idea of individual freedoms and just freedom in general, and it's a very important ideal and a very important and a very praiseworthy thing about America. Well, likewise on the continent, in many communities, if you think about West and Central Africa, where many people of African descent would have come from, there was a strong community ideal. Ideal of people, just as you've said, it's not just individuals, but like we try to, one succeeds, all succeeds, like what we would think of as team efforts, that was really important for people to have a strong sense of community, a strong sense of commitment to their elders, commitment to their children, and this kind of thing. Now, did it always happen? So that's why I give you that parallel, like that can be an ideal, but then, human beings kind of don't always meet their ideals. It's just, we're all frail, I don't always.
We're all flawed.
Absolutely. I have my ideals. I don't always, I try, but I don't always, I don't always meet them. So, but it doesn't leave you to have that ideal of community spirit doesn't just go away.
Yes, exactly.
Even if you don't practice it all the time, even if you're transported to another country, another continent, by a slave ship, it doesn't go away.
It doesn't go away.
So I think there is something there in the African American community. Which is community.
Which is community, For those of you just tuning in, you are listening or watching Encounter, a show of the Broome County Council of Churches. I'm Reverend Alicia Dixon Gerard, and I'm here with Dr. Ann Bailey having a conversation about Juneteenth. So what would you say is the significance of continuing to recognize and celebrate Juneteenth? And you said something key, that there was a movement to get it recognized as a national holiday, which took years.
It took a long time.
But finally, 2021?
2021.
Okay, it's now a national holiday.
Right. I would like to, in that, one of the things that I try to combat in my work is erasure, because it's so easy to just like their freedom journey was erased for 2.5 years, it's so easy to erase really important milestones. And so that recognition is so key from that point of view. I also want to recognize Reverend Dr. Ronald Myers, who was, he's, was from the South. He passed away a few years ago, but he was years and years advocating for, Juneteenth to be a holiday. And he was a part of an organization that I'm a part of myself, but a Christian organization that was advocating for this. And at the time, they were, I have to tell you, many of us just thought this is a pipe dream. I mean, I'll just be honest. We're just like, well, this is nice, and there's Reverend Ron working away, and he's like, we're going to the White House, we're going to, we're going to Washington, we're going to this, we're writing letters. I mean, they just did so many different things. They had various statewide committees on Juneteenth. They still, and there's some of them are still working now. But Reverend Myers and those group of advocates just were tireless in trying to say, we need this, you know,
Yes.
not just African Americans, but again, the whole country needs to acknowledge this holiday. And I'm very thankful, you know, that it happened in 2021. President Biden was the one that, you know, gave the okay.
Yeah, I'm glad too. And some people might feel like, well, we already have an Independence Day or Freedom Day, July 4th, for United States of America, but there's this huge contradiction that the Declaration of Independence, all men are created equal, with the right for life, liberty, pursuit of happiness, but there were whole populations left out of those rights. And so thus I think the significance of saying that, recognizing the fact that the Independence Day was not independence for all, July 4th. So to include Juneteenth as this expansion of freedom that everybody can celebrate is significant. So I don't think it's an either or per se, but it can be a both and.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely. I hope so. You know, I mean, I think, you know, Frederick Douglass famously had that speech, what is July 4th to the slave?
Excellent speech.
What is July 4th to the enslaved? And it speaks for itself. You know, for those who don't know it, please look it up. But it speaks for itself. What is it? How do you celebrate freedom when you're not free?
Exactly.
It's just that simple, you know. So now we can celebrate July 4th. And also, as you said, it's a both and. I do hope that people will, and I see this happening, so I want to leave you on that encouraging note, because I get called from time to time by sometimes like a big bank will say, big mainstream bank will say, we're celebrating Juneteenth. Can you come talk to us about it? Or, I mean, which is wonderful. I mean, when I see like big mainstream organizations saying this is important to us, and you'll be sitting there and the CEO shows up to, it's not just a meeting for like, which would be fine if it was just a meeting for the African American community, but wonderful that it's everybody feels a stake in Juneteenth, and that's beginning to happen. So it might not be obvious to everybody, but there's a lot of folks out there who recognize that it's an important holiday. And most importantly, my hope is that they're going to join the advocacy effort to ensure that freedom really is for everybody. The full rights of freedom is extended to all.
Right.
Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
That's my hope.
And so that's great that that's happening, that the mainstream is becoming
Oh,
more aware and participatory.
Yeah.
What would you say to white Americans who are like, oh, that's a black holiday?
Yeah.
You know, that's for those people over there. What would you say to encourage them to participate and learn more about Juneteenth and make it part of their lives?
Well, first of all, it's a fun holiday. Who doesn't know what a good fun holiday, you know? If you're like me, you struggle with work-life balance, so it's a good thing to have a day that you really do, you know, stop and reflect and just have some fun and celebrate something. And I know right here in the Binghamton area, there's always something that's happening. There's always groups that do something. So one, I would say, please try to find out about those groups and find out about what they're doing on a public level, whether it's a picnic or it's some speeches or lectures, or, as I said, usually it's something outdoor. You know, usually it's an outdoor activity. And I'd say just join them for that day and find out about some of the things that they're working on. There are folks working on housing rights. There are folks working on, you know, increasing educational access and better resources for our kids. There are folks working on all kinds of different issues that, you know, the voting rights issue, you know, I mean, that we've just talked about. So there are folks who can often use some volunteer help. And I think the first thing to do is just, you know, be a part of the celebration, learn more about what are the continued, what's the continued struggle? What else is there to do? Because as I've mentioned, there is, you know, there is much to do, and we need all hands on deck. I want to remind people that every single major human rights struggle in this country was fought multiracially. It was never just like a black thing or an indigenous thing. Every single major human rights struggle, whether it was to end slavery or the civil rights movement and so many other movements, it's been multiracial. So You're welcome.
Yes, yes, and that I think is such
You're
a
welcome.
great thing
Yeah.
to highlight.
Yeah.
And one of the beautiful things that can happen is cross-racial, probably cross-class genders cooperating
Absolutely.
to expand freedom, to make sure
Absolutely.
freedom is actualized, that it is real for everybody who lives here.
For sure.
And that no one is denied it, like you were saying, and that takes all hands on deck.
It sure does. It sure does. It's just there's got to be a sense of, I think you went back to the phrase in the Bible, but the least of these, that you really are going to be protecting your democracy when you reach out to the least of these. You're going to be enhancing,
Right.
it's something you're doing for you as much as you're doing it for this marginalized community. You really are doing it for yourself and your family and for their long shelf life throughout the ages. You know,
Yes.
that's what you want, is to see the dream of America extended, and for that light not to burn out,
Right, exactly,
And it's
exactly.
always in danger. Democracy is always in danger if it becomes smaller and smaller groups, smaller, not wider, not bigger, not rights not extended to all. It's always going to be in danger if that's the case.
Yes, and that's scary to think about, but I think we might be a little bit spoiled as American citizens of
Sure.
thinking, kind of taking it for granted that it's always been there. But I think people of color who kind of have these multifaceted histories of
That's right.
dealing with exclusion and oppression tend to
Yeah.
be alert to what you're saying,
Very true.
that it isn't always a given.
Not at all.
Yeah,
Not at
yeah.
all.
So
Not at all.
Juneteenth, in a matter of speaking, is an American holiday.
It very much is.
It's an American holiday.
Yeah,
Black
it really
history
is.
is American history.
American
Even the
history.
parts of it that we don't like, even the
Yeah.
parts that we may sometimes feel a little ashamed of,
Sure.
like slavery, rather than being caught in that shame, be part of the solutions that these things don't happen again, the denial of freedom and rights.
It would be nice. I think I've often said, and I will maintain, maybe I won't be around to know for sure, but I do believe that 100 years from now, 200 years from now, you're going to be known for your reforms. You're going to be known for the restoration of the breach. You're going to be known for what you did right after the wrong.
Right.
As opposed to, the 1 millionth technological advance,
Yes.
which, by then somebody else will come along and say they have another technological advance. It's just the nature of things, right? That somebody
Exactly.
else will come up with something else eventually, but this is not something they can just come up with,
Right.
you see? This is not something you just invent in a lab. This is something that you've had to really go through the trenches and the most difficult circumstances to get to the other side.
Right.
And that'll be our testimony.
I love
Yeah,
that. That
yeah.
will be our testimony. Thank you for listening and tuning in today, the show Encounter. I'm Reverend Alicia Dixon Gerard. Dr. Ann Bailey joined me today to talk about Juneteenth. I hope you learned something, because this was a great, insightful
Thank you so much.
conversation. Thank you for being with us, and we'll catch you next time.